The Simpsons is one of the longest running shows in television history. That makes their annual Halloween episodes one of our longest running spooky traditions. They're violent enough to give Itchy and Scratchy a run for their money and still filled with the biting humor of our favorite cartoon family. These are the episodes that we just can't wait to sink our teeth into every year at around this time. Hi, I'm Caleb with Wicked Binge, and today we'll be ranking the Treehouse of Horror episodes from tame to terrifying. Just a couple of rules before we hop into the mayhem. We'll be looking at just how scary each episode is. That means we're taking into consideration each of the 3 stories in each of the 31 Treehouse of Horror specials. Horror is subjective, so in addition to how scary our writers found each episode, we'll also have a couple secondary considerations to help us make those tough calls. Those will include how creative the episode was, the scare to laugh ratio, and in a few cases, the source material for parodies. That being said, we want you to keep in mind we're not necessarily ranking our favorites here. Praise and criticism may be delivered throughout the video, but we're judging spooks, not quality. And finally, unlike our usual videos, these will not be broken up into tiers. They'll just be ranked, as the title suggests, from the tamest to the most terrifying. But the only way to know for sure which ones will scare you the most is to join us in watching all of them. Here is our suggested order. Taking the spot for the tamest place to start your marathon is Treehouse of Horror 19. Don't get us wrong, there are fun times to be had in this anthology. We love the random Mad Men parody that eases us right into the middle segment, how to get ahead in advertising. It also made us question how our morals might change in a world of sentient pumpkins and talking turkeys. Revenge! But in terms of scares, this one left us wanting. We loved the Grand Pumpkin, but taking him down with the power of imagination was more whimsical than spooky. It's also a topic we've seen covered in other Treehouse tales before. Then we have Treehouse of Horror 12. This episode has not aged well as some of our others on the list. Aside from some outdated language and offensive stereotyping though, we just didn't feel like the opening segment Hex in the City offered much in the way of fear. The middle segment wasn't bad, but the killer house is something that we've seen done in the show already and with greater impact. The final segment seems safe, right? Because when have we ever seen anything related to Harry Potter age poorly? But to be serious for a moment, the Simpsons' take on the Wizarding World was more fun than scary. And thankfully, it was written before we knew anything about the Hogwarts plumbing. Ugh. Up next is Treehouse of Horror 27. This one got our hopes up with a promising parody setup. For the tale of Dry Hard, Mr. Burns hoards all the water during the world's most serious drought. They lean into the Hunger Games style premise of making children fight to the death, only to pick on the least interesting elements of the franchise. There was an interesting middle story about Lisa's imagination, but again, it's something we feel has been played out over the last few decades on the show. Though it was executed to a more terrifying effect than in 19, where we had a similar complaint. Mowfinger was an uninspired spy story that was more action than slasher. It was a fun episode with some promise, but it's not inspiring any nightmares this time around. Following that is Treehouse of Horror 29. The sad thing about this story is that they dug deep into some classic horror roots, and there was a lot of potential with all 3 tales. They cover pod people, Lisa finally snaps at Bart's antics, and genetic experiments go horribly wrong in the final offering of Geriatric Park. Unfortunately, not a single one of these tales sticks its landing. There are some half-hearted attempts at feel-good messages, and that's just not the spirit of this holiday, or the Treehouse for that matter. Moving on is actually the following year's episode, Treehouse of Horror 30. We're not gonna lie, this one is a ton of fun. It had some of the timeliest references of any Treehouse of Horror. The opening segment, Danger Things, covers Stranger Things for a surprisingly excellent fit. Who knew that the show many of us have been watching since the 80s would pair so well with the 80s nostalgia? Unfortunately, if you weren't scared by Stranger Things, you definitely won't be scared by the watered-down take on monsters. We could virtually say the same thing about the final segment, When Harry Met Slimy. It was a very humorous take on The Shape of Water, but it focused strongly on the romance portion, not the few spooks that were to be had. An excellent episode, and we highly recommend it, but it is more for the faint of heart. Up next is the Treehouse of Horror 23. In all fairness to this installation, we actually believe that the opening segment, The Greatest Story Ever Hold, is one of the most frightening premises in Treehouse of Horror.
The black hole is looking a lot bigger.
Black holes are powerful, unknowable, and we like that the show tapped into the terror behind the real scientific principle. The other two segments dragged it a bit lower on the list. There was Unnormal Activity, which perfectly captured the slow pace of the source material. It may work well for slow burn horror fans, but it doesn't translate as well to middle segment cartoon territory. There was also Bart and Homer's Excellent Adventure, which runs amok into romance territory yet again. Highly worth watching, but there is scarier yet to come. Speaking of which, let's now talk about Treehouse of Horror 25. There were a couple of hits and a miss in this one. The astute fan has probably noticed the writer's fascination with A Clockwork Orange. Bart dresses as Alex DeLarge in one of the earliest Treehouses, and we Viddy Maggie do the same a couple times after that. All real horror show. The middle segment, A Clockwork Yellow, finally does a proper parody of it. Unfortunately, it falls flat in the scares now that it's finally here. Fans of the film, or book for that matter, will have plenty to appreciate, but the terrors of the social commentary are all but entirely lost to the segment. School as Hell is your standard violent Simpsons special,
Psychological torment, pain plus fear.
a little heartwarming and a lot disturbing. The ending segment, The Others, is the one that we wanted to talk about in particular. The Simpsons are haunted by the Simpsons from the Tracy Ullman Show. While the execution of the plot and Homer's personality shift in general left something to be desired, it was a fascinating meta callback that we couldn't help but appreciate. The idea of Simpsons reincarnations also tapped into a very specific sort of existential dread summoned by the idea of such a staple of a show being changed. Up next is Treehouse of Horror 17. This one is weird. The opening segment, Married to the Blob, sees Homer become a ravenous cannibal. That was scary, but not as scary as the strange note it ended on about eating homeless people. The closing segment, The Day the Earth Looked Stupid, was a very clever piece centered around the War of the Worlds. Absolutely genius. The middle segment was about Krusty the Clown's Jewish golem coming to life and taking orders from Bart. So, make of that what you will. We will, in the meantime, move to our next pick, Treehouse of Horror 24. This one had one of the most creative introductions. Instead of a spooky skit or straightforward warning, they redid the entire Simpsons introduction as reimagined by Guillermo del Toro. We feel like the first segment, Oh, the Places You'll Go, may have missed the mark. Have the creators of The Simpsons learned nothing from the early thousands wave of horror? More violent doesn't always mean scarier. In this over-the-top Cat in the Hat parody, Homer the Fat in the Hat abducts his children to sow chaos around the town. The children understandably grow afraid of him and end up killing him so they can wait for their mother at home. It was too violent to emulate the source material, but too whimsical to be scary. All in all, we're not too sure what they were going for with this one. Despite that opening misstep, however, we feel it's a solid Treehouse entry. The middle segment pits Bart against Lisa as the two are forced to share one body, each trying to remove the other's head.
I'm gonna make sure you stay asleep.
A silly cartoon premise, yes, but it did get into the Halloween spirit. The conclusion, Freaks No Geeks, served as a callback to our long-beloved horror classic, Freaks. Even with the weird How I Met Your Mother joke as a final shot, we feel like this tale was scary enough to take the hit. Following that is Treehouse of Horror 18. Once again, they have chosen to parry some non-horror content. That never leads to the scariest tales. Both the opening and middle sections were automatically less frightening because they chose to parody E.T. and Mr. and Mrs. Smith, respectfully. That being said, we were impressed by Heck House. Sure, it played off the long-standing Treehouse of Horror joke where sweet, good-natured neighborino Ned Flanders turns out to be the devil. But we thought the setup to this one was particularly clever in comparison to some of the others. After that, we have Treehouse of Horror 26. The middle entry from this was Homerzilla. While not the scariest of the Treehouse tales, it was long overdue considering how long it had been since they took their crack at King Kong. Likewise, there was nothing too remarkable about the closing entry, Telepaths of Glory. It was decent, but not overly frightening. What was frightening about this one, you ask? Well, we saved the best for last, and we'll cycle back around now to discuss the opening entry, Wanted Dead, Then Alive. The first tale of terror from this anthology kicks off with Sideshow Bob successfully killing Bart.
Nice try, Bob.
Even though the audience knows better than to treat the Treehouse of Horror as canon 26 years in, there's something deeply unsettling about seeing the villain succeed after so long. And with murdering a child, no less. There are even big-name horror franchises that are even too scared to kill off the little children for fear that they will go too far. To have that start the tale was scary enough. What makes it far, far worse is the invention of Sideshow Bob's that allows him to bring Bart back from the dead. Then he can kill him over and over and over and over again. For that premise alone, we think it deserves its ranking. Following behind is one of the most iconic installments, Treehouse of Horror 7. Everyone remembers when Lisa accidentally creates a small civilization of people. Everyone in this case also encompasses South Park fans. The series had an episode paying homage to The Simpsons with this idea featured as a prominent plot point. What you might not remember is that it was only the middle section of the Treehouse of Horror anthology. We think the idea could have easily sustained a longer episode, but perhaps it was just too outlandish to fit anywhere else. The opening section, The Thing and I, was some over-the-top Halloween fun. We learned in this episode that Bart had a conjoined twin at birth who had been chained in the attic all these years. The episode also ends on Citizen Kang, which provides some excellent social commentary. All in all, this episode had a little bit of everything, and we loved it. Next up is a personal favorite, Treehouse of Horror 10. We couldn't justify putting this any higher on a scary scale, but it was a truly hilarious episode. It starts off with I Know What You Diddly Did, which was a fun take on I Know What You Did Last Summer. Only this version involves fog jogging and a Flanders werewolf, so obviously it's the more entertaining story. It also features desperately seeking Xena, where Lucy Lawless, voiced by the legend herself, is captured by the Collector.
I told you I'm not Xena. I'm Lucy Lawless.
He plans to turn her into his bride after killing Bart and Lisa, who have been exposed to radiation and developed superpowers. Not the most horrific premise, unless you want to draw the Annie Wilkes comparison with a deep-rooted commentary about toxic nature of fandoms. But even we think that might be a bit of a stretch. The episode ends on Life's a Glitch, Then You Die, which sees the Simpsons separated and the world end. It may not have been done in the scariest fashion, but it was a fittingly bleak end to the special. If you're looking for lighter but more violent scares, our next entry has you covered. Treehouse of Horror 9. This was released early in the Halloween special days, and it shows. All the ideas seem fresh and fun, finding a good balance of scary and hilarity. It opens with Hell to Pay, where Homer's hair transplants makes him murderous. The middle segment for us is what really steals the show, however. Remember in our intro how we said the violence in these episodes could give Itchy and Scratchy a run for their money? Well, in this episode, we get to see the beloved cat and mouse get in on some of the murders. It ends with the sophisticated Starship Poopers. We're kidding. While it might not be the most intellectual premise ever featured in one of these anthologies, it was well executed and played off the real fear of having horrible secrets in one's own home.
I was hoping this day would never come.
We move on to Treehouse of Horror 16. Now this is what we call a solid entry. While there was no standout tales from the set of 3, there were also no blunders. The ideas themselves may not have been awe-inspiring, but all 3 were well executed and entertaining. It starts with Bartificial Intelligence, where Bart struggles with a reality in which his parents love his robotic replacement brother more than him. It moves to the Survival of the Fattest, which sees Mr. Burns hunting humans on a private island. It ends with the classically titled I've Grown a Costume on Your Face. A misunderstanding with a witch results in everyone being turned into their costumes. The scariest episode? No. But this one comes with a hefty helping of spooks and consists almost entirely of Halloween fun. Following in its footsteps is Treehouse of Horror 14. Now, this one had some very clever ideas. It really is a shame that the anthology setup gives us so little time to enjoy some of these worlds. All 3 of these concepts would have benefited from the full 20 minutes to themselves. In Raper Madness, we see Homer get to take up the mantle of death. In Frankenstein, we learn about Springfield's smartest inventor and the complicated relationship he had with his father. Of course, these insights are had while its reanimated father is looking for more brains to eat. And in Stop the World, I Want to Goof Off, we are treated to the ramifications of children who have been given too much power. 3 fun tales with sinister undertones and a solid pick for your next marathon. Now on to another one of our favorites, Treehouse of Horror 8. This one just starts on a great note. Although the openings of the anthology aren't technically what we're looking at, it's worth mentioning that this one is very clever. We see the censor at Fox being stabbed repeatedly by the TV rating, which is going up and up before finally landing on 666. A very ominous beginning to one of the scariest episodes. The Omega Man sees Springfield dealing with mutants. Their design? Spectacularly frightening, especially for a primetime cartoon. Seriously, there are live-action zombies who could take some lessons from this. Fly vs. Fly is, as you may have guessed, a twist on the classic Cronenberg film. Though it doesn't have the same level of gore, there were plenty of enough emotional twists to keep us at the edge of our seat. The anthology concludes with Easy Bake Coven. It serves as a fun, almost educational insight into what the spirit of Halloween truly consists of, bribing witches with candy so they don't eat your children. Now for a cursed number, Treehouse of Horror 13. You knew they had to step up their game for the unlucky 13th installation of Treehouse, didn't you? Even in the opening, they're trying to bring Maud back from the dead. While fans of Futurama have seen what can happen when a self-involved, beer-loving character gets cloned, the exploration of the concept actually started right here on The Simpsons. The fright to creep and scare harms is possibly one of the most horrifyingly convoluted titles ever to be featured in this series, but it is also our pick for the best segment from this episode. It got real with its political commentary, but that's nothing new to The Simpsons. This poignant piece about gun control brought a bit of levity and a healthy dose of real dread to the table. If there was a weak entry, it would be the island of Dr. Hibbard. The episode ends on what starts as a parody and ends as sort of a creepy animal-human hybrid paradise. If you want any more elaboration than that, you'll have to watch it for yourselves. We, however, will be enjoying our next slot, Treehouse of Horror 3. About time some of these classic episodes show up, huh? A Clown Without Pity wraps a lot of parodies and references into one small package with a killer Krusty doll. King Homer was the aforementioned King Kong parody. Hey, we finally got there. In terms of parodies, this one was probably the most straightforward. Not a lot of extra stuff was mixed in or really changed, but it was a cute segment nonetheless. Our favorite selection was the third and final tale. Dial Z for Zombie was an excellent piece of cartoon macabre. It's a well-placed and loving nod to the return of the living dead that really captured both the camp and tension of the original. Of course, it is much tamer than the horror movie, but for a family-friendly version, they got pretty intense. Our next section is Treehouse of Horror 11. Bear with us because we think the horror is more subtle in this one. While most of our terrifying selections up to this point have been pretty in your face, there were just a lot of unsettling elements in this one that added up. In Ghost Dad, it was the foretelling of Homer's death. Though a large part of the story takes place after Homer has already died, the idea that he knows it's going to happen leading up to the actual event, plus the bleak ending, has very sinister undertones. In Scary Tales Can Come True, there's a similar sense of unease. The prophetic nature of the Grimm's fairy tale collection that Lisa is reading is spooky on its own. I mean, have you read some of those things? But the fact she can barely read it as quickly as Bart stumbles into fairy tale hijinks builds a surprising amount of tension for the two. Night of the Dolphin may have been the weakest link. In trying to parry the birds with dolphins, the entire premise seemed all the more cartoonish and silly. That being said, it was not entirely devoid of creepy messaging either. In this case, the moral seemed to be that sometimes caring can in fact make things worse. Very bleak, very fitting for an early edition of Treehouse. Up next is Treehouse of Horror 31. People say that The Simpsons has lost its touch, but their 31st Halloween special has climbed up pretty high on our list. It falls just short of top 10 material for those of you who aren't keeping track of our place. It's also worth mentioning that this is the 666th episode of The Simpsons, and how cool is that? What we like about this episode has actually been a complaint in the others. Most of their references were not strictly horror-based. Where this episode succeeded was that it did highlight the scariest parts of the source material successfully. The perfect example of this comes from the first tale, Toy Gory. It follows the same premise of the beloved children's movie Toy Story, but it really lingers on the pain of the toys that are subjected to Bart's rough style of play and what it would be like should they choose to seek revenge. A chilling thought, to be sure. Into the Homerverse talks about the instability of any multiverse occurrences. This isn't as outwardly frightening, but it does put a darker spin on the original Spider-Man concept being tackled. And B9 Rewind has one of the most terrifying things, death loops.
Back at the same beginning?
We talked about this in an earlier entry where Bart was being killed multiple times over and over. That was scary and weirdly intimate since he was being personally murdered by his arch nemesis repeatedly. Where we feel this version has the edge is that Lisa and her unlikely comrade Nelson remember that they're dying repeatedly. If there's anything worse than dying multiple times, it's carrying the memory of all those deaths with you. There are some similar scares in the following entry, Treehouse of Horror 21. While again the source material isn't the scariest, we love how hard The Simpsons doubled down on some of these concepts. In the opening tale, War and Pieces, we see a board game entitled Satan's Path bring all the other games to life. It's harder to wrap one's head around than Jumanji, and if you can believe it, all the bloodier. Master and Cadaver was relatively tame in comparison. It was a down-to-earth middle section that capitalized on human basic fears of strangers and regret. And who could have forgot about Tweenlight? Anyone who wasn't afraid of the sparkly vampires in Twilight should take a look at this. We think that they're actually much scarier when they're 8, dorky, and more aggressive than their original counterparts. We don't know what's scarier, having to be an 8-year-old forever, or having your vampire boyfriend not understand that you don't want to be an 8-year-old forever. Moving on, we arrive at Treehouse of Horror 20. This was not a kind year to Lisa Simpson. In the opening sketch, dial M for murder or press pound to return to the main menu, Bart tricks then blackmails her into killing his 4th grade teacher. Eventually she snaps and turns on her brother instead. In the second, we get a very personal fear of hers. Not only are the people eating meat, which bothers her as a vegetarian, they are eating meat-fed meat. That is rightly called an abomination. It also leads to a highly contagious strain of virus that nearly ends the world. In that sense, it really wasn't a good time for anyone. And in the third slot of the show, we have There's No Business Like Mo Business. While the plot threads to Sweeney Todd may have been a stretch, we do really admire The Simpsons' commitment to the vibe of a stage production. There are curtains, there are breaks, and of course there's plenty of bloody singing to keep us entertained. It brought a fresh idea to the show and got everyone out of their comfort zones. Next up is Treehouse of Horror 22. The really shocking thing is that Treehouse of Horror made it 21 episodes before they thought to capitalize on the very popular fear of spiders. This episode creeps into our top 10 for being utterly cruel to arachnophobes everywhere. The opening tale, The Diving Bell and the Butterball, sees Homer being paralyzed by a Black Widow spider. Scary stuff, especially with the close-ups of the spider. The worst part is that when he is eventually given powers by the radioactive spider, we first see it crawling all over him while paralyzed. This includes going in and out of his eye sockets, all 8 of those legs skittering out from under the lids before biting him again. This seriously might be the scariest animation segment in any of the 31 episodes we're discussing today. The second tale is more of an existential fright. In Dial D for Diddley, we see an unusual Dexter parody starring Ned Flanders. He is being manipulated into killing people by Homer, who is pretending to be God. For any Dexter fans out there, you may agree that this is a weirdly accurate casting. That aside, it taps into something a little deeper. The things that comfort us, like religion, can sometimes also be used by the unworthy to manipulate us. It's some food for thought. But luckily there is a lighter note to end on, and that's the only thing keeping this from being higher on the list. In the Navi is a pretty straightforward Avatar parody, although it does get weird when Bart fathers a bunch of alien babies and potentially picks up a space STD from Milhouse.
I have space warts, and I got them from Milhouse.
But we're choosing not to dwell on that, and we'll be moving on. Here we have Treehouse of Horror 15. In case you didn't get enough Ned Flanders in our last entry, the first tale in this episode is The Ned Zone. It's actually a bit strange that with over 30 years of horror parodies, there have only been a small handful of Stephen King selections. Here we see Ned struggle with the difficult moral decision after he is gifted the power to see the future. He has to decide whether or not he has it in him to kill his best friend Homer Simpson if it means saving the rest of Springfield. Of course, we know it's never quite that simple. 4 beheadings and a funeral was the tamest entry of these 3. It follows Detective Lisa as she investigates a serial killer in London. Though this was played for laughs more than the other 2 accompanying stories, there is plenty of murder and tension to go around. The final tale was the scariest. In the Belly of the Boss doesn't seem so bad on the surface. The Simpsons need to be shrunken down to rescue a shrunken Maggie from inside Mr. Burns. Those of you who have been watching our gruesome videos knows that this premise is almost always disgusting, even in animation, but it does not stop the family from going in to rescue their youngest. Unfortunately, Homer doesn't make it out on time. Rather than ending in the far more plausible scenario where Homer explodes out of Mr. Burns, his boss survives the ordeal with a Homer-sized man living just under his skin. It was probably one of the most effective pieces of body horror ever featured on the show. It was also enough to single-handedly bring this one close to the top of our terrifying spectrum. But scarier still is Treehouse of Horror 6. Back in the early days of Treehouse of Horror anthologies, we just had to respect the writer's commitment to horror content. We have one campy, classic-style segment with Attack of the 50-Foot Eyesores. This is followed by a more serious installation, Nightmare on Evergreen Terrace, which actually does a decent job of bringing a legal-to-use Krueger character out of the skin of groundskeeper Willie. And then we end on a bit of a physics-based and existential dread where a 2D family experiences the third dimension for the first time. Sure, it's funny, but would you, as a 3D person, think it was as funny if you were suddenly thrust into the fourth dimension? We doubt it. Unless there were erotic cakes somehow involved. Up next is Treehouse of Horror 5. Here comes our other King parody. The Shining is one of the most iconic Simpsons bits. It's legally ambiguous, it's hilarious, and it does justice to its source material with the bloody elevators, hedge maze, and deranged father. This also has the added horror of Mr. Burns playing haphazardly with the lives of the people he employs. Time and Punishment deals with the horrific idea of time travel and how to navigate it. While simple enough of a premise, they did a great job conveying their point alongside Homer's panic at his predicament. And Nightmare Cafeteria is some classic good cannibalism terror. It just keeps putting the pressure on until it's finally revealed that it's all a nightmare Bart is having. In a surprising twist, and that is more terrifying than comedic, the real danger turns out to be a fog that turns people inside out. We get to see this horror firsthand before the very organ-exposed family ends the episode on a musical number. We won't be forgetting this one anytime soon. We move now on to the Treehouse of Horror 4. We had spoken earlier about the idea of Ned Flanders as the devil had lost its shock factor. Well, there was a time where it hadn't. That time was Season 5, Episode 5 of The Simpsons, where Ned revealed himself to be the Lord of Darkness in the opening tale The Devil and Homer Simpson. It's always the ones you least expect. This was a clever and fun twist that became a staple for the Treehouse gags for years to come. Not to mention, he is pretty terrifying as Satan. It makes his cheerful demeanor feel like a facade, and I, for one, have not seen him the same way since this episode aired. The middle section was also phenomenal. Terror at 5.5 feet builds excellent tension, even through use of cartoonish antics. There's a real sense of isolation even on a crowded bus when no one believes Bart Simpson about the gremlin that is trying to kill them all. It all wraps up with a classic Bart Simpson's Dracula. While not the scariest classic tackled in Treehouse, it was a solid end to a very solid collection of terrors. Just behind this is Treehouse of Horror 28. Another modern one creeps into the top 5. We only have a few episodes left to go at this point, and you may be surprised to find one from the 29th season of The Simpsons. But we feel like this one was genuinely pretty scary, especially for the kiddos. It starts with the XXIX, where we see Maggie infected with Pazuzu. This call back to the Treehouse tradition of tackling classic horror movies was just what the special needed to kick off the celebration on the right note. It moves into Coralisa, which is one of my personal favorites. Though Coraline the movie was not nearly as scary as Coraline the book, the show does a great job showcasing the creepiest moments. With the elongated features and button eyes, the other family still isn't as scary as living with The Simpsons. What we loved most about this episode was the callback to the early days of Treehouse anthologies where Marge interrupts the show to give a warning about how graphic the final tale is.
What you're about to see is so disgusting.
And sure enough, that tale is called Homer. And it's about Homer Simpson eating himself. It's disturbing, it's absurd, and it really is a well done horror premise. Making it all the way to the penultimate spot and sadly no further is Treehouse of Horror. The original came so close to being our number 1 pick, and honestly, we tried to push it over that line because we're a little biased. But seriously, this is my personal favorite Treehouse of Horror. Not only did it establish this amazing tradition for Halloween fans and Simpson fans that come together on an annual basis, but it was well done. It set the groundwork for 3 scary tales being told, and it told its selections well. Like all of our following favorites, it had a good balance. There was one tale, Bad Dream House, that was scary in an existential way. There was one comedic tale, Hungry Are the Damned, that relied on misunderstandings while ending on a bleaker note, and there was one classic retelling, which was in this instance, The Raven. And let me just nerd out for a moment because The Simpsons retelling of The Raven is one of my all-time favorite things in the world. Lisa takes the poem very seriously and reads it in a somber tone indicative of how the poem is usually read. Bart has perfectly timed interruptions in his fits of boredom that lead to priceless commentary on the evolution of horror as it pertains to the decreasing attention span of audiences. As we get into the scene proper, something truly beautiful happens that any Poe fan has to love. Homer's shouting of the lines, while not traditionally how the tale is told, brings a new life to the frustration of the narrator. Take thy beak from out thy heart and get thy form from off thy door. Absolute timeless genius that becomes more relevant every year. This was my favorite tale from my favorite Treehouse of Horror, and while I'm thrilled I got to go on my tangent, we still do have one scare selection for you. The winner of the most terrifying episode is Treehouse of Horror 2. When Marge comes out on stage and says this year is going to be worse than the year before, she really wasn't lying. This season 3 offering, the second ever Treehouse of Horror, really was the scariest of them all. It opens with the parody of a classic, which was in this case, The Monkey's Paw. What was so exceptional about this over other adaptations of the story is that the horror was twofold. There were the terrible consequences that seemed to occur whenever the Simpsons used the paw to make a wish, the standard terror of the story, but there was also horror that came from regret. Since you couldn't see the terrible consequences from outside the wish bubble and the paw gets passed along, the Simpsons get to see all the benefits that happen once someone else has it. It was an elegant addition to the original that was more fitting for the tone of the show. The second tale was also something to behold. In a Twilight Zone style story, Bart has unlimited powers over the entire world. That's terrifying enough on its own, and we're not sure that we need to elaborate much. Everyone walks on eggshells, the world ceases to function, and his monstrous creations roam free while he is praised for making them. One of the scariest elements of this was the realism that was sometimes and surprisingly applied with little warning. An example of this is how Krusty the Clown is no longer allowed to sleep and the toll that it's taking on him physically. If we had one complaint, it would be that the episode ends with its comedic entry into the anthology. Though on second thought, maybe it needed a lighter tone after all the scares it had already given us. And even in this light entry, we see Mr. Burns go mad with power yet again. He creates a robot to work harder but makes the mistake of giving it Homer's still living brain. And that's been it, everybody. All the Treehouse of Horrors ranked from tame to terrifying. What did you think? What episodes always make you laugh and or shiver with dread? Let us know in the comments down below, along with how many of you joined us in watching this year. While you're down there, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and as always, stay wicked.